Alright, we're going to see how far we get before I get pulled to wipe somebody's bottom or something. So tonight we're going to do a slightly different approach than what we've been doing. I'm not going to be dealing with a specific text. I'm going to be dealing with some comments that were made the night before. Tagging Brian because he was the one that was asking the questions, but let's see here. Pull up a couple of things here because I want to be able to do this right. Let's see here. All right, there's my list. So this question stems from comments I made on Genesis chapter 13, verse 15. For all the land which you see, this is God talking to Abraham. For all the land which you see, to you will I give it, and to your seed forever. The Hebrew there is ad alam. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And so we're going to talk a little bit tonight about this idea of ad alam, and I'm going to find other instances where this concept of forever is talked about, where it is fairly obvious that it's not talking about until the end of time or in some undefined, ongoing, never-ending idea here. So in Exodus 12:14, God is delivering the law to Moses and says, "And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever." And we know that those feasts that were instituted were ended at the law, at the cross. Same thing in verse 17, you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this self-same day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt, therefore you will observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. These feast days typified Christ. There's a lot of the old law that pointed directly to Christ. He is the fulfillment of these feast days. He is the fulfillment of the old law. And so all of these ordinances, all of these feasts that God is ordaining here, they ended at the cross. We can see that in Colossians 2:14, Ephesians 2:15. Sorry, I'm going to be drinking a lot of tea here because I got back to teaching after being off for a week, and my throat is going to be absolutely dry. So Exodus 21:6, then his master shall bring him into the judges. This is a slave who has decided he loves his master and doesn't want to be free. Hey, Stephen. So when the master is about to set him free, the slave says, "No, I don't want to be set free. I want to continue to serve you for the rest of my life." So it says, then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Obviously, that is for the rest of his life. Both master and servant in each specific case died, but time still continues. So there is a definitive period of time. They're not both zombies walking around. They got cursed to walk the earth in perpetuity. Because the slave decided he didn't want to be free. So there's a definite in there to forever. It's just for the whole of time, for the whole of the covenant or the whole of their relationship. There's a specific nature to their relationship here. Exodus 27:21, and the tabernacle of the congregation without the veil, which is before the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall order it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever unto their generations on behalf of the children of Israel. Chapter 28, verse 43, and they shall be upon Aaron and upon his sons when they come into the tabernacle of the congregation, or when they come near unto the altar to minister in the holy place, that they bear not iniquity and die. It shall be a statute forever unto him and his seed after him. Numbers 10:8. And the sons of Aaron the priest shall blow with trumpets. They shall be to you for an ordinance forever throughout your generations. So the idea here is, The Walking Dead. Hey Roderick, we're talking. We're basing this off Genesis 13:15, but we're talking about what does the Bible mean when it says forever, and it's my contention that forever is related to the duration of a covenant or the duration of an allotted time period. It means it's better translated for the whole time, rather than what we think of as forever. Our English idea of forever is not the same as what this is talking about in the Bible. So anyway, these ideas of the tabernacles and the blowing of the trumpets, even if we talk about the temple, the tabernacle was replaced by the temple, so that wasn't forever. The temple was destroyed in AD 7 or AD 70, and that was not the first temple, the one that David designed and Solomon built. It was actually the third temple, Herod's temple, and it was destroyed in AD 70 and has never been rebuilt. So that ended that forever. And then the Jewish priest system itself ended at the cross. We read in Hebrews chapter 7, verses 12 through 14. I'll bring that up here. Hebrews 7. For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. For he of whom these things are spoken, talking about Jesus, pertains to another tribe of which no man gave attendance at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord, talking about Jesus, sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses spake nothing concerning the priesthood. So the priesthood had to be changed, meaning that this whole ordinances for Aaron and his sons, the forever ended, because the law was changed. And so these ordinances were taken out of the place. The tabernacle was no longer, the temple was no longer, the sacrifices were taken out of the way. All of these things ended, that the Bible uses that ad alum for, the foreverness, that we interpret incorrectly a lot of the times. Talking about the Sabbath day, Exodus 31:17, it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. It's important to understand. So my understanding was a third temple. So you had the temple that David designed and Solomon built. That was sacked and taken out by, and like not completely destroyed, but really messed up by the Babylonians. And then when they came back, you have Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilding the temple, restocking it and doing all the things to bring it back up. But then it fell into disrepair. Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth Antiochus, comes in and he messes it up, and then Herod comes in and he rebuilds it, and it's like this grand, beautiful thing, and everybody is like amazed at what all Herod put into it and stuff. So as I understand it, it's a third, but it's really kind of the first. It's just been rebuilt a couple of times. It just depends on how you look at it, but it was basically Herod's temple is what it was called. So anyway, so this idea of the Sabbath, note there isn't anybody outside of the Israelites who are given the Sabbath day. Adam doesn't observe it. We don't have any of his descendants through Noah that observe it. You don't have any indication that Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob observed it. It isn't until we get into Exodus, Moses and the Israelites. Exodus 20 is the first time we hear of it, verses 8 through 11, where the Israelites are told, you're going to work for 6 days, and on the seventh day you will cease from your labor, because God did the same thing when he created the universe, which is where we get the idea of Moses writing Genesis chapter 1. So but the Sabbath was something specific to the Israelite nation. Right, exactly. Yeah, it really was just the first original temple. It got worn down, broken down, torn down, but not like in a complete sense. And then they rebuilt it, and then it got messed up again, and then Herod comes back in and rebuilds it back up and makes it awesome and refurnishes it and just makes it into this wonder in the land. But it's still essentially the same temple. So it just depends on how you look at it. I don't know. It's not really important to me, but anyway, this idea of the Sabbath was specific to the Jews. Or specific to the Israelites, and that ended with all of the other ordinance that were specific to the Israelites at the cross. You can read the whole book of Hebrews. Talks about an end to the Sabbath in the physical sense, that we have a rest remaining for us. Or if you, I don't want to get into the eschatology stuff, but it talks about how the Sabbath was a type pointing forward to an antitype during New Testament times. So the Sabbath ended at the cross. Deuteronomy 4:40, you shall keep therefore his statutes and his commandments, which I command you this day, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may prolong your days upon the earth, which the Lord your God has given you forever. So the land, the Eretz, God had given them that land, but they stopped having that land after the Romans came in and sacked Jerusalem. They lost control of it, and they didn't get it back till 1948. Well, that's not forever. That's a whole huge swath of time, more than 1,000 years, that these guys don't have the promised land that God promised them, if this means that they got to keep the land after their purpose was fulfilled. It also, this this idea of God promising this forever misses out the people who argue in favor of, well, we should give Palestine back to the Israelis because they're the descendants and they're God's chosen people. All that argumentation is missing the whole point of the Israelite nation. Their purpose was to fulfill. They were the vehicle to fulfill the promise to Abraham, to bring Messiah into the world and bless all the nations. Christ fulfilled all of that. He brought in the fullness of everything the Old Testament is talking about. All of it was completely fulfilled in Christ, by the end of the 1st century AD. The Jewish state as a spiritual theocracy ended at the cross. The ordinances were nailed to the cross. Their spiritual purpose had been fulfilled when Christ was brought into the world, and they ended up murdering him. And then the civil existence of the Jewish state was ended 40 years later when Jerusalem was taken, the temple was destroyed, and finally at the very end the zealots at Masada were captured, and they, once they took down every stone from the temple, just like Jesus prophesied on Olivet. They took every stone down to where we don't even really know where the temple stood. And they used Jewish slaves captured in the sacking of Jerusalem to build a ramp up to this plateau fortress summer home that Herod had built called Masada, and used the slaves as shields. And when they finally got up there, almost everybody had committed suicide. It was kind of a reverse Alamo. I think there was like a slave, a woman, and a child that were left. So when all of that ends and you finally have the delivery of the last book of the New Testament, John's 4 eponymous letters and Jude, that was it. The entirety of the Old Testament completely fulfilled with the penning of the last letter of the New Testament. There isn't anything left to the Old Testament. It is absolutely completely fulfilled. A lot of people want to go to Matthew 5:17 and 18 that Jesus said. Well, let me read it because I'm too tired to quote things correctly tonight. Matthew 5. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill, which he didn't come to just cut it off and say, nope, we're not doing that. He came to fulfill the contract, to fulfill the promise. Oh, that's cool. I definitely got to go see that if that's the case, because that would be awesome to walk up that. Horrifying, but awesome at the same time. But he came to fulfill the law, to complete it. And he says, for verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. And people are like, look, there's still a sky, there's still space, the planet's still here. And so you have the Jewish state is still here, and the law is still binding us today, and they don't understand that what heaven and earth mean to the Jew. You can read Moses sets it up all through the book of Genesis, all through, you can look in Deuteronomy 31, 32, but you can also see in Isaiah chapter 1, verses 2 and 10, and then when you get into all of the apocalyptic language, heaven and earth are the leaders and the people they rule. And this was the Jewish state. That's what 2 Peter 3 is talking about. There were the heavens and the earth during Noah's day, the leaders and the people that they ruled that were wiped out. Sin was wiped out. Planet's still here, but the earth, the heavens and the earth were destroyed. Then the second heaven and the second earth, which was the Jewish state, existed, were destroyed, and then a new heaven and a new earth come about. And that is the church with Christ as the king. He is the new heaven that is never going to, as long as time exists, Christ is always going to be king. And then the Christians, the church, the people to be ruled by him are always going to be in existence. That's why Revelation 21 says that there's a new heavens and a new earth, and there's no more sea, there's no more separation between the Jew and the Gentile. That's what the sea represented. And then we see the bride coming down out of heaven, and then what does John see described by the angel? He sees the church being described, the bride. And so that's the new heaven and the new earth that was post the Jewish persecution. So Matthew 5, 17 and 18 was fulfilled. So let's see here. Got some comments. Let's see here. Stephen agreeing. Yes, he will. Jesus and his kingdom, which are really inseparable anyway. Yeah, body and head. The ramp is still there. Definitely want to see that. I fulfill my marriage vow today. I believe I should fulfill it forever. Right, but even there, you're saying that you should fulfill it forever. Does that mean if your wife passes away, God forbid, do you still fulfill your marriage vow? Or is it until death do you part? Is it a specified duration? Does your covenant have a cutoff? And that right there is just more evidence that the way that we use forever is kind of not correct. To think of it as just ongoing in perpetuity without end. Has all the prophets come to pass? Yes, everything from Genesis to Malachi, all of that has already taken place, all done, all fulfilled completely, 100%. There isn't anything left in the Old Testament, very little in the New Testament that has yet to be fulfilled. Most of it came to be through the establishment of the church, which was about a 40 or so year period. The fall of the Jewish state, the end of Judaism, and then you have the coming about of the church victorious, the church matured, the bride of Christ not having to worry about the persecution anymore. Hi Dawson, hi Abby. We're kind of hi Karen. Miss Penn is my old music teacher, not old, but my music teacher from back when I was in school. So glad to have you aboard. We are talking about the idea of forever in the Bible and what it really means. And it does not mean ongoing forever the way that we use the term. It means for the allotted time. So to answer your question, Brian, yes, it's all come to pass from the Old Testament. Replacement theology, I think it's called, which says God pretty much just threw away Israel and started from scratch. With the church, that's false. God was faithful to Old Testament Israel. The Messiah and his kingdom is the proof. Yeah, absolutely. So, hi, I'm going to call you Karen. I hope that's okay. Although it was Miss Penn back in the day. I'm too old these days and a teacher myself. So, but it's really good to see you. I'm glad you're here. So, yeah, let me, Brian, I want to answer your question. But I want to get to some of the things that I have here listed because they relate specifically to what we're talking about here. If you go to Leviticus 26, you go to Deuteronomy 28, you go to Deuteronomy 31 and 32, God gives Israel a conditional promise. He tells them essentially, if you obey me and you follow me and you do all the things that I have commanded you to do, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to make you the most awesome nation the world has ever seen. But if you don't, if you disobey me, I'm going to wipe you from the face of the earth. And that would end forever real quick. Well, guess what the Jews did for almost the entire time, from the time they left Egypt to the time they murdered the Son of God? They disobeyed God over and over and over again. And it was only because God had made that promise to Abraham that he let them linger. He took the northern 10 tribes. Once they decided to split off, then the promises pertain specifically to Judah. And they needed the Levitical priesthood to kind of stick around so that the Jewish state still worked as a theocracy. So you had Judah, Levi, and Benjamin kind of tagging along. And that was it. God eradicated the northern 10 tribes. Completely gone. Done. The Jews stick around. They're called Jews after that because they're the southern tribe of Judah, which included all 3 tribes. And they stick around, they hang on, they're barely clinging to existence through Babylonian captivity, and they finally come back, and then they got the Greeks coming in with the Antiochus guys coming in and messing with them, and then Rome comes in, and the Herods get it all good with them and basically give up their power to Rome, saying, yes, we want to be part of the Roman Empire. Give us all your riches and your wealth. And the same story over and over and over again, where Israel or Judah is trusting in foreign nations and wanting to be like foreign nations, completely and totally disregarding the idea that God could provide for them. And Messiah comes into the world. He preaches for 3.5 years. They murder him. And God says, I'm done with you. He gives about a 40-year period for the church to get from the moment that it was founded at the cross to the moment where it was strong enough and mature enough to survive without any kind of supernatural help, essentially. It's the time period when the Bible's or the New Testament's being written and delivered and revealed. You have that establishment period, and then God just ends Judaism. It is gone. When the temple is destroyed, there is nothing left of Judaism. It was a shadow, according to the book of Hebrews anyway, and now we don't even have a reflection of that shadow left today. There isn't anything. You have people who make the claim, but there is no priesthood. They don't have the official records because they were burned in the temple. Nobody can trace their lineage back legally to Abraham like they used to be able to do. All of it's gone. All of it's based off of the Talmud and the rabbinical traditions. There is nothing but lip service given to Moses these days. So anyway, yeah, 26, 28, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28 are the terms and conditions. That's exactly right. So Brian asked, where is Daniel then? He was to come back at the end also. So yeah, so this brings it, and this is really getting into eschatology, which forever really does. I'm what's called a partial preterist, and so my understanding of the last days or the end times or all of that is the last days of the Jews. So when we look at Daniel, especially Daniel 9, we're talking about the 70 weeks or the 77s. That's 490 years from the command to go forth and rebuild Jerusalem that Cyrus gives. Isaiah names him before he's ever born or thought of. Isaiah names Cyrus by name, but 490 years, you got this 483 years. There was 7 years, that was 7 weeks, which is 49 years, where they would go and then they would have the city rebuilt, and then 62 sevens after that, which brings us to 69 weeks or 483 years. Messiah would come and be cut off after that. So you have the 483 years, and then the Jews don't have any purpose at that point. And so there's a 40-year period where we're talking about the establishment of the church, and the Jews are kind of ignored. But because they're still there persecuting the church, you have this final week that Daniel talks about in the last part of Daniel 9. And in the midst of that week, that 7 years, the temple is destroyed. It's talked about being destroyed. And so that last 7 years is the Jewish wars, the Jewish-Roman War, starting in the very end of 66 AD and going to the very beginning of 74 AD. When Masada falls, Daniel is completed. And then you can get into Daniel 10, 11, and 12, and you get down to like my brother and I have studied this. When you get down to the 1335 days versus the 1290 days, they're down to like the day when the Jewish war ends, and then there's a signing of the peace accords when the Christians know that they can come out. The Jewish state has for all purposes ended. And it's amazing how just absolutely accurate and precise the Bible prophecy is. But yes, Daniel has been completely fulfilled, 100%. Okay, yeah, but Jeremiah 31, again, fulfilled. When was Israel called? They were called by the gospel in the first century. You have, for the first 9 chapters of Acts, the people who made up the church were the remnants of the Israelites. And then after that, who did they go to? Jesus said that you would go to Jerusalem and to all of Judea, to Samaria, that's the northern 10 tribes, and then to all the world. So that was the pathway that the apostles took. They preached to the Jews first, then they preached to the half-Jews, the Samaritans, and then they preached to the rest of the Gentiles. That's everybody. And so they were called, but they were called by the gospel, and now it is Christians that are called the people of God. And if you are a descendant, if you are a biological descendant of Abraham from any of those tribes, the only way for you to be grafted back into that tree, Romans 11, is the same way that the Gentiles get grafted in. Because the Israelites were broken off. The branches, those individual people that were natural branches because they were part of the natural kingdom, they got broken off from God's family. And so God says, I'll graft you back in, but I'm going to graft you back in. I'm going to adopt you the same way that I adopt the Gentiles. And so that is the fulfillment of Jeremiah 31. It's already been done. It was done during the first century, and they've been called the people of God because 3,000 on the day of Pentecost, another 5,000 in Acts chapter 3, and ongoing for 40 years. And then we see, and of course, again, this gets back into eschatology. Revelation talks about the 144,000 are representative of all the Jews who ever, during that first century, who converted to Christianity. They were the faithful remnant that were converted to Christianity before the Jewish state itself was wiped out. So, let's see here. Yep, exactly right. Stephen and I agree on eschatology, so I agree with his answer there. God would be their God and they his people, Revelation 21:3. Exactly so. 2 Corinthians 6:16, one agreement has the temple of God with idols, for you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Yes. Again, So over and over again, we see this as a fulfillment of all of the Old Testament. Hi, Jeremy. We're talking about forever tonight. The ministry to Israel still goes on. Brian, there is no biblical Israel. There's no... Today's Israel is just another nation. It's just another set of people who are making a claim to some kind of attachment to what we read about in the Old Testament. But when you actually look at the Old Testament and you look at what they had to be to legally be called the people of God, biologically, that no longer exists. They cannot exist. There's no way to prove the claim that they make, because all of those records were kept in the temple. And when the temple was burned and destroyed by Titus and his army, that was it. That was the end of the genealogies. On top of that, the Bible over and over again, every letter that Paul writes almost is about the Jews aren't, there's no purpose to the Jews anymore. There's neither Jew nor Greek. It's all one in Christ. The book of Hebrews, just read the book of Hebrews. The whole point of the book of Hebrews is the Jewish system was old. It was flawed. It needed to be taken out of the way. It could not save. It only had bulls and goats to sacrifice. Jesus comes along. He gives us a better covenant based on better promises, a better sacrifice. He is the high priest. He is the king. All of it is better under the new covenant. Well, under the new covenant, there is no Jew, there is no Greek. So to say the ministry to Israel still goes on, not biblical Israel, that doesn't exist anymore. Does the ministry to the Israelis still go on today? Sure, just like every other nation in the world, because that's all they are, is just another nation in the world. There's really only two sets of nations that exist now. There is a spiritual nation with Christ as king, and that's the church. And then there's all the physical nations, of which the Israelis are just one of those. They don't have a special place anymore. It all ended in the fulfillment of the Old Testament, which culminated in Christ and all of the things he did during the very first century. So, yeah, Israel identified by family and tribe, Numbers 118, Ezra 259, or 259, and they are gone, completely gone. So this idea of forever, and the way that I will continue to use it throughout the rest of Genesis, I'm going to harken back to this video every time. I think the point is well established, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Every example we could give, I could give a few more here. Samuel served at the temple, 1 Samuel 1:22. So let me pull that back up. 1 Samuel 1:22. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before Jehovah, and there abide forever. Is Samuel still living there at the temple? Well, it wouldn't be the temple. It would still be the tabernacle, because David hadn't come yet. Let's see here. Yeah. So, is Samuel still there? No, Samuel's dead and gone. There's not even a tabernacle anymore. So another one here. God is angry at Judah, Jeremiah 17:4. So Jeremiah 17. So starting in verse 1, the sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, with the point of a diamond. It is graven upon the table of their heart, and upon the horns of your altars, while your children remember their altars and their groves. That's the pagan worship. By the green trees upon the high hills, O my mountain in the field, I will give your substance and all your treasure to the spoil, and your high places for sin throughout all your borders. And you, even yourself, shall discontinue from your heritage that I give you, and I will cause you to serve your enemies in the land which you knowest not, for you have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. Is God still mad at Judah? If God's promise to Abraham and his descendants was forever, and that means it's still ongoing, we're still going to see some truth to it, then God's anger and their dwelling and serving in a land that they don't know, serving their enemies, is also still ongoing. And that sets up a contradiction, and you cannot have a contradiction in the Bible. They don't exist in the Bible. But if we understand forever to mean an allotted time, yeah. Hosea 2:19. I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and justice and loving kindness and mercy. Well, on top of that, he got divorced too. You read in, I believe it's Ezekiel 16 or 17. He talks about being married and how he took care of her and brought her up out of the streets and made her basically into a queen. And yeah, exactly. So there go Christmas trees. That they have pagan roots. 100% agree with you. But anyway, God marries Judah. He talks about Israel and Judah, and he's married to Judah, and he says, I gave you all of these things. And here Hosea is talking about, betrothed forever. God marries her, so the betrothal didn't last forever. And then he divorces her, and God hates divorce. And then he executed her. Forever has a duration, because it doesn't mean forever the way we think of forever. It means for the extent of the time, for the total time. God would remember his promises. He would keep his covenant. He would fulfill everything in the time that he set for it to be filled. And he gives us that all through the Old Testament prophets, both the major and the minor prophets. You have Aholah and Aholah. Yeah, I'm going to butcher those names, but right. And so, that ended because it had a specific duration of time. And so I believe that we have absolutely established the point that forever has a different meaning than the way that we use it for the allotted time or for the duration. For the complete duration is a good way to put it. That God will fulfill his promises, that when he gives a promise, however long it takes to fulfill it, however long he says that it's going to take, then he will keep all of the promises related to it until such time as it is fulfilled. When it's fulfilled, forever it has ended. And Judah, the Jews, that state is gone. There isn't anything left of it. The only thing that we see, like I said, is a reflection of a shadow. So that's all I got. Almost a 40-minute one tonight, but I think it was necessary. It's definitely a good one because there's a lot of people. There's a number of different groups out there, lot of different groups out there that still hold to the Old Testament and Israel being authoritative today. There is the millennials who not talking about the age group, but the people the millennialists who hold to the idea that Jesus is going to come back and set up 1,000-year kingdom here on earth, that Judaism is going to have a special place in all of that. They hold to that. There are the Torah observant people who have decided to fall from grace if they were ever under it and go live by the Old Testament again. Basically the success of the Judaizers that Paul fought against his entire career as an apostle. The Catholics really strongly hold to the authority of the Old Testament in a lot of ways. And so it's important that we understand what it is the Bible is saying in the precise way that the Bible is using terms. The Old Testament has its place today. I'm not saying that we should just not read it. You can't understand a huge part of the New Testament if you don't understand the Old Testament. Romans 15:4 says that the things that were written aforetime were written for our learning. We definitely learn a lot from the Old Testament. It has no spiritual authority over us today. It doesn't. There's no command. None of the 10 Commandments. Everybody's like, we should follow the 10 Commandments. No. none of those 10 commandments should we follow, because they're Old Testament. We're not Jews. Now, it just so happens that 9 of those commandments are also in the New Covenant, the New Testament, the law of Christ. And so we follow those laws because they're in the New Testament, but we don't follow the 10 commandments, if that makes sense. It's a new nation. It's got a new constitution. We're not part of the old Jewish state. We're not part of the Israelite nation. That they had a different constitution. The law of Moses was their constitution. That nation ended and doesn't exist anymore. That constitution is fulfilled. It's completed. It's done. Does not govern the state that it was meant to protect. New covenant, new constitution, new city, a city-state. We talk about the heavenly Jerusalem, Hebrews 12, 22 and 23. Behold, you are coming to Mount Zion, unto the heavenly Jerusalem, to the church of the firstborn. So what is this link that you're sending me? I can't, let me type it in and go there, because I can't pull it up on my phone or I'll end the thing here. ohr.edu/7737. Forever and ever to continue his master. Olam, ad olam. Yeah, so there was a 50-year duration. I don't care really about the Talmud at all. It has no authority over anything. Sorry, I'm reading this as fast as I can. Okay, so again, rather the word le'olam denotes a very long period of time, but nonetheless has an endpoint. Yeah, I still agree. So I'll read through this whole thing. I don't put any authority into the Talmud or the rabbis. I mean, their commentary is as good or as bad as anybody else's. But I do thank you for the link. I definitely want to read through it. But define when you have time in the Christian law. Yes, Karen, thank you for tuning in. I'm glad you were able to be here tonight. I won't do these every night, but I'm going to try to get as many in during the week as I can, as much as my youngest will let me, when she doesn't have to poop on the potty. So, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and rest my case tonight. I think I've made a very strong case to defend my position enough that I can move forward with what I'm doing in Genesis and continue through the book of Genesis, at least so that people will understand me and where I'm coming from when I go through the rest of the book, because we're going to see this. So, okay, Brian, I acknowledge that. Thank you, Stephen. So, thank you guys for tuning in. Brian, thank you for the original question. It's definitely one I think is important and one that we needed to go over. So I hope you guys will join me next time. Tomorrow's Tuesday. I've got a long day at work. I don't know that I'll get one in tomorrow. Look for the post. I usually try to put up a warning 15 to 30 minutes before I get on. It'll probably be around the same time, 10:15, 10:30, something like that. Wednesday I am completely out. I have another thing that I do. I participate in another group's live. They do go live, and I participate in the comments every Wednesday. So it might be tomorrow and it might be Thursday before I get to Genesis chapter 14. But I might try to do 2 chapters because of that. So we shall see. That's all I got for tonight. Mark, you're just catching us here at the end. I guess you'll have to go watch the whole thing. You'll probably find it pretty interesting. Don't know that you'll agree, but there'll at least be a challenge there for you. So I do appreciate you hopping on, though. Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a good night.